You know, when you get older, you kind of look back on your life and in your childhood, and you can see things that you appreciate more, maybe a little bit better, and other things maybe not so much. But one of the things I look back on and I really appreciate from my family, my brother Jim can attest to this, is that we played family games. Board games, card games, and whatnot. Because not only does it have the family together in an activity, and some leisure, but also you learn some valuable life lessons, like there is no rage quitting, right? Just because you get mad doesn't mean you get to flip the board and walk away. You learn how to be a gracious winner, and you know how to be a gracious loser in that. Well, one of the games that we played, especially as we got older, is that very popular poker game called Texas Hold'em. I think many people here know this. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. You just play for fun. I know, you just no money involved. But there, in this game, there's the most dramatic moment when one of the players takes his chips and he pushes them in and says, "I'm all in." And maybe bluffing, maybe he's got the cards. But as I understand the game, is you can't hope to really win and to beat your opponents unless at times you're willing to do that, to go all in, to risk everything on the turn of a card. Well, imagine this widow in the temple. She's lost the loving presence of her husband. You can imagine her loneliness. Maybe he was the love of her life. Maybe his death has left a void in her heart, and she may struggle to face life without him. She's also lost her livelihood and her protection and security. There were no pensions and Social Security back then. She had to rely completely upon the Lord and others for food and shelter. So imagine her vulnerability and her hardship. Like the same widow in the Old Testament, in that book of Kings, right? Going out to collect the last remaining sticks to cook her last remaining flour and oil, and knowing she's like, yep, unless something happens, we're going to starve. Well, imagine this widow at the temple. All she has in this world, these two small coins, she now puts them into the temple treasury. She's going all in. And you know what? God sees her. God in the flesh is right there, and he sees her. He's right there. He tells those around him, his disciples, to their astonishment, that she put in more than all the rest. They gave out of their self-sufficiency. She gave out of her need. And the Lord sees truly, and he sees the risk and the vulnerability and the faith of this woman. She truly was the richest one there. Now, last week, we've heard from the gospel and heard from Deacon about the first and the greatest commandment, the most important thing that we have to do in this life. And if we don't get this right, nothing else really matters, is that we love God with all our mind, all our heart, all our soul, all our strength, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. And love, as we know, is more than merely words and feelings. It's shown in deeds. Love is choosing to act for the good of another, sacrificing oneself for the sake of someone or for something else. And now the Lord has given this teaching about the greatest commandment, and now he's people watching at the temple in order to teach his disciples about how to put that love into practice. Now, the treasury at the temple, it was like this large tuba-shaped receptacle that led to a secure money box. So you can imagine people would put their coins in at the horn at the top, which was like a funnel, and then funneled everything down the metal tubing into the box. And so many rich people, as St. Mark says, were putting in large sums of money. You can imagine the sound that made, the tinkling of all those coins going down the tuba-like thing. And then this poor widow goes up and she puts in 2 lepta, which is basically 2 small, super thin coins that together were worth about a penny. Can you imagine? This barely made a sound. And this widow, because of her poverty, could have easily have given nothing, or maybe just put in 1 lepta and kept the other for herself. But she went all in. And what motivated her? There's only one reason for that: her deep faith, her trust, her vulnerability with God. She believes not only that simply God exists or that he had worked miracles in the past for her people, she believed so much in him and was so convinced of the importance that was going on in his house, the temple, that she wanted to dedicate her life and all of her goods to continuing and expanding his work. That work for her of the Lord was worth more than even her own life. And aware of the poverty, she gives in trust. And you can see what the key is here. That she is there in her vulnerability and in her poverty, in her fears, with the Lord in faith. And the truth is that the stronger of our faith, the more we're willing to be vulnerable and to trust in God, the more we are willing to sacrifice. The more we love God with all of our mind, heart, soul, and strength, the more we will give of ourselves and what we have to the advance of his work. And the first apostles knew this. Moved by their faith in Jesus, responding to his call, they left the fishing business and a lucrative tax collection post to follow Christ, even though they would have, like Jesus, no bread, no money, no bags, no change of clothes, not even a place to lay their heads. To trust that the Father would provide for them. And this continues in the early Christians. In the Acts of the Apostles, they used to sell their property, lay the proceeds at the feet of the apostles in order to share with those who were most in need and to help advance the proclamation of the gospel. So in hearing all this and the example of this poor widow, I think it's important that we take stock, that we have a prayerful conversation with the Lord about how we use our money and resources of which he has made us the stewards. Do I tithe generously or stingily? Do I give what's left over or do I give sacrificially? Am I striving to go all in according to my state of life? Even in tough economic times, that all of us should be tithing sacrificially to our parish and school. And of course, this is not just simply an economic issue to help our parish, our school, and the other institutions in the church to survive and to thrive. It's more importantly a moral question, since economists will tell us that what we spend our money on tells us what we value. Well, what do we value? Our Lord makes clear, too, that it's not the amount of the contribution that matters. It's not the amount, it's the sacrifice that the gift entails. In St. Luke's gospel, I think he teaches us more about this. Jesus tells us that the measure with which you measure will be measured back to you. In other words, if we give generously, we're in a position to receive generously. If we give sparingly, we will receive sparingly. And this is not because God is some sort of, accountant in the sky keeping track of everything, tit for tat. Rather, it's the way we are made as human beings. That if a person's heart is open and generous, it expands, it gets bigger. And so therefore it's then capable of receiving more. if it's tight and miserly, then the very little of God's grace will be able to get into that. That's why Jesus says that it's not the amount, it's the sacrifice that it entails. And this, of course, goes well beyond money. Of course, I remember too, when I was a kid, going back to childhood, mowing lawns. I remember getting that first thing of money. Like, wow, this is great. And my dad was like, so, how much are you going to give away? Like, what? I worked so hard for this. Yeah, even as a kid, it was like to start to learn how to say, you know what, I'm a steward of this. Right? How can I use to help others? And this goes way beyond money too. Like it's about generosity. So how generous am I with my time, with my patience, with my forgiveness? How generous am I with that? Helping around the house with my schoolmates. How sacrificial am I in that? Seeking to love God with all that I am. Have I gone all in? And of course, Jesus doesn't say, just do what I say. What does he always tell us? Follow me. Because you'll notice where St. Mark puts this account of the poor widow after telling us about the greatest commandment of loving God and neighbor. Then after the poor widow, he starts talking about the end times, and then St. Mark goes right into the Last Supper, the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus. In other words, Jesus is teaching about being generous, being sacrificially generous, about going all in, is given with showing how Jesus is putting his own words into practice on Calvary. And Jesus is calling us to give not just what is extra, but what is essential. Not just what is left over, but going all in. He's simply telling us to love as he has loved us. All the way, holding nothing back, all in. He gave his life in exchange for ours, valuing us more than himself. And now he comes to us in this Mass. He makes himself present here to strengthen us to do this in memory of him, through the total gift of himself in his sacrifice and his body and blood. So let's ask him to open up our hearts in vulnerability and trust and in faith, to make us as generous as he is, to open our hearts fully by the might of his love and grace, to love him with all of our mind, heart, soul, and strength, and our possessions, like the poor widow, who shows us how to go all in with the Lord and to follow him who loves us and who is saving us.